Own the Road with Kelly and Bob, the USA 250 Tour, brought to you by Mueller. Coming up on this episode...
Until we understand that whether you're black, brown, white, whatever, we're Americans, we all want the same things.
We, the people of the United States of America.
Hi, and thanks for joining us for this edition of On the Road with Kelly and Bob. I'm Kelly Phillips.
And I'm Bob Phillips. As we continue our journey of all 50 states in the U.S., we are constantly reminded that the story of how our country came to be isn't always written in the history books, at least not the complete story.
And that the best stories are often about people we never even heard about or read about in our history classes, but instead are often about ordinary people who stepped up at the right time and did the right thing.
We heard a lot of those stories recently during our visit to Providence, Rhode Island.
If there's one thing we learned during our trip around the United States of America this year, it's to never assume. I'm sure you remember the old saying about what that does. To assume, I mean.
Teresa Guzman Stokes made that abundantly clear when she started our interview with the assumption she knew we had made. Because, well, just about everyone makes the same assumption.
I guess one of the things that your audience will probably wonder is why I run the Black Heritage Society. I'm Latina.
Yes, Teresa Guzman Stokes runs Rhode Island's Black Heritage Society. And no, Teresa is not black. At least not that she knows of. And if she is, not entirely. Her primary cultural identity is Latina.
Born in California, a mixed race Latina of multiple things. I grew up in California up until high school, and then my mother wanted to go back to Guatemala, so we went back to Guatemala, and I did university down there, and then I joined the Navy and spent 10 years in the Navy, and one of my next to last duty station was Newport, Rhode Island, and I met my husband, and he showed up one day with an engagement ring. And
How long ago was that?
40 years.
40 years ago, Teresa Guzman married Keith Stokes, and together, the two have been Rhode Island's #1 power couple when it comes to setting straight the records of history. Keith, her husband, is now the state's historian laureate.
He's worked for the state for almost 40 years, but off and on. At the time, he was with the General Treasurer. Then he became the head of the Chamber of Commerce. Then he became senior policy advisor to the governor. So
he's had a life of politics, kind of.
He's working for his 5th governor, both Democrat and Republican, going both ways. And,
That says a lot, especially these days.
And he's very much a policy person. So that's what he cares about. And what he cares about is the policy of Rhode Island and what's going on and what's going to be best for Rhode Islanders. He's very much in love with his state.
Teresa Guzman Stokes wasn't born in Rhode Island, but you could never prove that through her lack of enthusiasm. She is one of the state's foremost advocates, singing its praises to anyone who will listen.
Rhode Island, she says, is tiny, but historically rich.
Rhode Island has an interesting history. Going before the Revolution. In colonial days, Rhode Island was founded because of a group of dissenters from the Massachusetts Bay Colony who left. Everybody knows the story about Roger Williams, but they don't know about the rest of his party, which was very exciting. A group of them, John Clark being one of them and the other Ann Hutchison, as well as others, broke off from Roger Williams and went down to Aquidneck Island, which was Rhode Island. Matter of fact, in marine maps, it's still Rhode Island. And John Clark founded Newport, which became the major seaport, and Ann Hutchison was one of the founders of Portsmouth, Rhode Island, which is the other end of Aquidneck Island. And she's one of the only females that I know that's a founder of any of the colonies.
But not all of Rhode Island's history is a source of pride for our smallest state. In fact, there is a dark period in its past that cannot be ignored. And as the head of Rhode Island's Black Heritage Society, Teresa says it should not be ignored, ever.
But getting back to Rhode Island, Newport ended up becoming a really big seaport, and it was mostly merchants. There was a joke about the early Quakers, because believe it or not, the first Quaker establishment was here, not
in
Philadelphia.
Pennsylvania?
No, they were here. And matter of fact, our Quaker meeting house in Newport predates that. But there was a saying about them: 1 foot in the meeting house, 1 foot in the counting house.
Oh.
Because they were all merchants and actually were involved in the slave trade. Up until the Quakers decided to abolish that and say no more slavery. And what often happened is that they simply left the Quakers' houses and went to Episcopal so that they could continue their business.
The slave trade, the darkest and probably hardest to understand part of America's past, but it happened. And now it's Teresa's job to try to explain it without explaining it away.
Yeah, and she does that in an interesting but almost clinical way. One has to suspect that it's a subject that hits, well, a little too close to home.
When you look at the old maps, most people don't read what's on the map. They just see the ships going, and you see it's a triangle. But if you go to the point of the triangle that's what we now call United States, it was Newport, Rhode Island.
That's where the ships came.
Yes.
With the slaves
Yes.
from Africa.
There's almost 1,000 documented slave ships that went to and from the triangular trade, 947 of them total, and I think 680 of them are from Newport. So, there's a few that are like Providence, Bristol, and then Massachusetts and a couple of others. But
how did that happen to begin with? Why here?
Let's go back to what I said in the beginning. Newport was a merchant town. That was sea merchants, and they owned the ships. They built the ships. They owned the ships. They captained the ships, and that's what made it the point of the slave trade. It wasn't that there were massive amounts of slaves coming. It's that all the ships were owned and operated out of Newport. Almost a third of Newport's population was black at one point. But most of the ships were going to Jamaica, Barbados, Charleston, South Carolina. We have really close ties to Charleston, South Carolina because of those ships. Families intermarried because of it. That's where the money was.
And this was, to those merchants you're talking about, this was just another product.
Yes, absolutely.
Slaves.
Absolutely. And they talk about diversification. They not only built the ships and owned the ships and operated the ships, but they would go down, they would trade for slaves in Africa, then they would go to Jamaica or Barbados or any of the other English colonies and get molasses. They'd sell the slaves, get molasses, bring it back up here, make rum, and then take the rum to Africa. So it was like that.
It was just,
they owned every part of the business.
they were doing very well.
Extremely well.
Trading humans.
Extremely well.
How do people in Rhode Island, you can never justify, how do they deal with the state's history regarding the transatlantic slave trade? When you look back on it, how do you put it in its place?
So my husband likes to tell the story. His grandmother often said to him, and he now says it to everyone, slavery is how we got here, it's not who we are. And sometimes we turn that around. Slavery is a part of Black history. It isn't Black history. It's important to know that it happened. But the stories for us isn't about the slave owners or the slave traders or any of that. It's about the Africans themselves. So if we don't talk about them, you're not really telling the story.
Our time with Teresa Guzman Stokes was eye-opening, informative, and even inspirational. She clearly loves America, Rhode Island, and what this country has been through to become who and what we are today. But with the understanding, that we still have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, let's pick up where we left off with our conversation with Teresa.
How did you get involved in the Rhode Island Black Heritage Society?
That's a long story. When I was in the Navy, before I even met my husband, I had a habit of living off base wherever I was. I was very interested in history already, and I was very involved in Black history, Indigenous history, Latin American history. A lot of my friends were in the Black community, and I learned a lot about this one burying ground, which is God's Little Acre. It is the oldest and largest existing burying ground of Africans and African Americans. And I was very involved with a woman named Rowena Stewart. She was the founder of the Black Heritage Society, which started in the AME Church in Newport. I worked helping her get the burying ground cleaned up, researching the people that were buried there, etc. And I stayed involved with the Black Heritage Society as an independent researcher. I was a writer. And then 10 years ago, they needed a new executive director, so
Here
I
you
came
are.
on board.
Okay. Does it happen? People walk in here expecting to talk to a Black woman that
Always. But what people also have to be aware of is that the African diaspora is very diverse. So there are some of us that speak Spanish, there's some of us that speak French. It's a huge diverse group. People think that Black is one group.
Yes,
and it's
they
not.
do.
It's multiple
Americans
cultures.
especially
Yes.
believe that it's one group, one culture, all alike.
Right.
And you're telling us that ain't the truth.
No, it is not. I just got back from Mexico, and there's a number of people there who understand their African heritage, but they speak Spanish. They're Mexicans. In Guatemala, we have areas that along the coast, we have some places where we have what's called garifuna, which are Africans that were brought there who never intermarried. So they're still very, very African in culture and in ways that they do things. You have Dominicans who are also very, very African in look, but also there are mixtures with Spanish and others. And then Haitians who are mixed with French.
Do you find that in America, in the United States of America, that the African American culture understands what you're talking about a lot more than the typical Anglo culture?
Mostly, I would say. I think there are some that don't. I mean, I've met people that you see a Black person speaking Spanish and they kind of go, "What's up with that?" We don't teach Black history very well in the United States.
Why do we not
and
teach it well?
Oh, my father used to say the conqueror writes the history books. So
Well, there is something there.
there's
yeah.
a lot to be said about that. But it's
Yeah.
also a way of erasing people's identities by not having that education.
Mm-hmm.
You grow up thinking, the way that I went to school in California, you heard about the Pilgrims, you heard about George Washington, you heard about a lot of these things. You rarely heard anything about Black achievement or people that had done well here.
Not when I was in school.
My daughter used to come home from school every year during Black History Month and said, "What'd you do for Black History Month?" "Mom, Martin Luther King, Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman." That's the end of
That's
story.
it. It is.
That's
yeah.
it.
Yeah, it was a day.
And if you heard about it, it was only about, there was a civil war that was fought and Southerners kept slaves, Northerners freed them. But it was always about the white perception of who was doing what. It wasn't about the Africans themselves or the African Americans themselves. It was always about the white that did it. I never knew that Blacks fought in the American Revolution or in the Civil War when I was a kid, because nobody talked about that. It wasn't until later that started to come out.
But there were, in fact, some heroes, if you will.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That we don't
Both
talk
male
about.
and
We don't know.
female.
Yeah.
Both male and female. One of my favorite people, her name is Duchess Comino, and she's an African woman who was brought here when she was about 13 years old, which is not unusual. Here in the North, there were a lot of children that were brought up. And the reason children were brought is they learn the language faster. They could be apprenticed to learn a job, because up here, unlike in the South where it was illegal to have religion or illegal to read and write, here it was required. You needed it. And so You wanted master craftsmen, you wanted master seamstresses, you wanted master sail makers, rope makers, barrel makers. So you apprenticed young 13, 14-year-olds, sometimes even younger, to get into these so that by the time they were adults, they were masters at what they were doing. And because of that, there was a lot of achievement by these people. And one of them was Duchess Quamino. She's sold into the Channing family, and she's apprenticed as a cook, and she becomes a fantastic cook and is selling on the days that they were allowed to. She could sell her wares and keep the money. Well, by the time George Washington came, she was well known as a caterer, and she made this thing called plum cake, even though it's not really a cake, but they call it plum cake. Apparently George Washington loved it, so she served it to him. Her story is amazing because she was able to buy hers and her children's freedom by 1780, and she ran a catering business, owned property, really
You
amazing
said
woman.
buy her freedom.
Yes, she had to earn her money and buy her freedom, and so she bought hers and her 5 children's freedom. She became known as the pastry queen of Rhode Island. There were, accounts of people saying, well, a party isn't a party if Duchess doesn't cater it. So it was that kind of thing.
She was quite a big deal in Rhode
She was,
Island,
but she was also very big in the Black community itself. In 1780, a group of African men formed the Free African Union Society, which was a society for self-help for the African community. And they did things like making sure people got proper burial rights, that there was education for children. They formed a church. She becomes the first female to be accepted as a member into what became the African Benevolent Society. She was highly regarded in the Black community.
How difficult was it for women back then?
Well, I'll give you a story. There's a woman named Mary Dyer, and she was also one of the dissenters and went down, and she returned to Massachusetts Bay Colony, and she ends up being hung as a dissenter.
because she dissented.
Mm-hmm. Women speaking out, it's like the witch trials.
Right.
So that usually was about women who were different. They liked
Outspoken.
to read, they were outspoken, they did things, and so that could get them branded as a witch and have them burned because people didn't like the way they were. So I think women had it very hard as far as just being able to say their opinions, believing differently, things like that. If they spoke out against, things that were going on in the Puritan religions, then they could get branded as witches or dissenters and could be burned or hung or whatever.
As we got to that point, pre-revolution, when we were deciding as 13 states, what are we going to do? Are we going to pull away from King George? What part did Rhode Island play in all of that?
Unknown to many people, they were the first to break away and say, we don't want to follow this king anymore. And matter of fact, our sort of Independence Day is May 4th. So we have a big May 4th celebration.
Because you predated what happened, the rest
Yes.
of it, by about 60 days.
We were the first to break away. We're also the last to sign the Bill of Rights. Rhode Island was interesting. They called it Rogue Island because we were definitely rogues. But the interesting thing is that they wanted to break away from the monarchy. They didn't like what was going on. But when George Washington and everybody decides, we're going to break away too, we're going to be independent, that was all well and good. They fought the revolution. But then when the Bill of Rights came around, Rhode Island's going, is this another monarchy? Is this, what's going on? So they hesitated and ultimately are the last ones to sign the Bill of Rights.
They want to
we
see how
don't-
it played out.
Yeah, we don't
Yes.
want to get into that same situation with George Washington and those guys.
Exactly.
That we were with King George.
Yeah, although they were very much patriots. We have a lot of patriots. George Washington and Thomas Jefferson were doing this sort of tour when they were trying to get support for the Bill of Rights. And they came to Newport and
And eventually, we were all one big,
We are.
I won't say happy family, but one big family.
but everybody forgets that, one of the biggest battles was the Battle of Rhode Island. And that was when the French were supposed to join us. And the ships were actually coming to the shore and there was a big storm that held them off. And so that's when the Battle of Rhode Island happened.
And we fought without the French help.
We did. And it was pretty good. Pretty good in the sense that we taught the British that, don't mess with us. A lot of that was due to what we call the Black Regiment, but it's actually the Rhode Island 1st Regiment.
Which is, why do we call that the Black Regiment?
We call it that now because a lot of Africans were coerced into fighting. A lot of people, just like now when we had draft dodgers and whatnot, or like in the Civil War when they would send a servant or someone to take their place. A lot of the masters here said, oh, well, we're not going to fight, but we'll send, these men. And there was the promise of freedom that if they fought, and they did, they fought very well. What happened is that the British and the Hessians were basically chasing them from one end of the island to the other. And so in order to allow supplies and men to get off the island, the 1st Regiment formed a line and they held them off while everybody else got off. And it was because of that that our troops were able to move off the island. So we have a area in Portsmouth that's called the Battle of Bloody Brook. That's where they fought and made their stand. And then, of course, they went on to fight in Yorktown and other places as well.
And after the Revolutionary War, were any of those promises of freedom kept?
Grudgingly.
Grudgingly.
Some of the masters tried to get their men back. Nathaniel Greene, who was the man who put the regiment together, fought for them, and a number of he and his officers stood up for them when they weren't being given their pensions or when people tried to re-enslave them. And so that's how they managed to maintain their freedom. And they weren't just black, they were some who were indigenous or mixed.
What can we do going forward to learn more, to be more accepting of what happened and all of the accomplishments that happened back then?
First, you have to accept that they're all Americans. That's probably the first and foremost to me. I think that the first thing to accept is that we're all Americans. And so we all have a story here. It's not just the Pilgrims. It's not just George Washington.
It's not just Jamestown or Plymouth Rock. It's a lot of other people and places.
Yes. I mean, Rhode Island has a lot of firsts. There's so much here to love. You could go from a very urban center like Providence, and we have a lot in Providence, a lot to see. You could go north into Woonsocket and those areas, and it's very rural. Or you can go to Newport and you're on the seaside. It's just a beautiful state. I love it when I go home and I go over the Newport Bridge and the island is spread out before me and I'm looking at all the sailboats and the cruise ships, and it's just gorgeous. And so it's hard not to fall in love. You have people of multiple ethnicities, multiple languages that were here. You had the French Canadians that were here, or still are. You have Italian, you have Irish. Just name a group and we've got them. So we have Liberian, we have a large African-born community where they're coming from Nigeria, Ghana, Senegal, Sierra Leone, all these different places.
Is that fascinating, to really be, a lot of people say, oh, we're a melting pot, but they're not really. But here, in this part of the world.
I don't like to think of a melting pot. We're more of a stew. If you're a melting pot, everybody gets melted in. You're assimilated into each other's cultures and everything.
A stew.
If you're a stew, then you're still a potato, you're still a carrot,
And that's okay.
And it's perfect. Cool. It's perfect. In the summertime, oh my goodness. Name a group, they're having a festival. And it's like you're going to their country.
You do like festivals here, I've noticed.
We do. We have music festivals, art festivals, you name it, we have festivals. But ethnic festivals, there's Italian festivals, and there's the Irish, and there's everybody has a festival, and you get to go and experience their culture, and everybody goes. You go to the Italian festival. You don't have to be Italian,
Just go and enjoy.
Yeah.
If there's one thing that you wish people would know about Rhode Island and its past and its history, what would you want them to take away?
We survive everything.
Ooh.
Everything. We are probably some of the most resilient people in the world.
Still today.
Still today. They fought with each other in the American Revolution because half of them were Tories and half of them were Patriots. And they survived that and moved on. Name a conflict or a political problem, we survive it, We're a very small community. We're a small state.
I love America. Mm-hmm. I want to revere our forefathers who made this all possible. But I have trouble understanding the frame of mind of people in our past who thought it was a good idea to own and abuse other human beings. Mm-hmm. Are you able to go back to the mindset and at least understand how these otherwise pretty smart people
would own other people?
How do you deal with that in your brain?
It's not easy to think about that. I mean, is it easy to think about people that thought it was okay to come to someone else's land and kill them and take their land?
Same thing.
That's hard to see. You know, I get frustrated when people say Christopher Columbus discovered America. Well, in the first place, America was here before he got here, so he didn't really discover it. It was new to him, but it wasn't a discovery. There were civilizations here, which is another concept people don't understand. They didn't bring civilization. Civilization was already here.
They brought their version of it.
Right. I understand the European mindset. You're talking about people who, for the longest time, thought the world was flat.
Yeah.
So I think that people only knew what they knew. And
you know what you know.
Can I fault them for that? Can I say they were bad because they were dumb? But they weren't dumb. It was just a lack of knowledge that they didn't. They had their own achievements in the sciences and in other areas, but that they didn't know that there was a whole world out there outside of what they knew. So there are a lot of differences in that. I think that's a hard truth that we have to come to in this country, is that we did try to erase people. That's just the way they did it.
Are we learning from history, or are we repeating it?
You know, I think we do sometimes learn from it, but I think we have a long way to go. A long way to go. I'm not saying there's no hope. We are getting there, but it's going to take a while. Until we understand that whether you're black, brown, white, whatever, we're Americans, we all want the same things. We want good lives for our children. We want, equitable pay. I mean, look at women are still fighting for equitable pay. Until we get there, it's going to be difficult. But I think if we all keep remembering that this is our country, I still think of us as the best country in the world. I probably always will. But
we have a lot of freedoms that other people
we do, but we have to remember that we have to fight for those freedoms.
Exactly.
Every time somebody tries to take them away, we need to fight for them. Because once we don't fight, we lose them. We lose those rights.
And Teresa's reminded us that the history of Rhode Island isn't just found in books. I mean, it's etched into the very streets we walk and the communities we build. By uncovering these stories, we don't just honor the past, we pave the way for a more equitable future. Thanks for listening to this week's edition of On the Road with Kelly and Bob. Also, a big thank you to our sponsor, Mueller Metal Roofs and Buildings, who allow us to travel all over America and find these incredible stories to send back to you. Best way for you to not miss anything on our USA 250 tour is be sure and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, as well as our YouTube page. Don't forget, you can listen to On the Road with Kelly and Bob wherever you get your podcast. Or best thing to do, download that free Odyssey app. Listen anytime, anywhere.